My name is Matthew McGuire. I come from the United States. Dr. Green invited me to come up and talk about the New Age. He put spiritual but not religious on the roster, but he had asked me about the New Age, so pretty much the same thing. But that's what we're going to talk about today. Who am I? I am just a Christian. I'm involved in lay ministry down in Maine. I went to school up at Crandall University, studied under the professors there in biblical studies, and I do a lot of writing on the topic of New Age spirituality. So that's what we're going to talk about in the context of missions today. I have a book that I wrote that kind of talks about this, and I wanted to give away a copy for whoever can answer my trivia question. What term, popularized in New Age spirituality, refers to the energy field that surrounds all living beings, and it's associated with spiritual healing and balance? Aura. Okay, you get a free book. You can.
You gotta raise your hand.
He did raise his hand.
Oh, you raised your hand. What were you gonna say?
I was going to say aura.
Yeah, right.
I did know.
I brought enough for both of you, so come on up. You can grab. There's one paperback. There's one hardcover. Whatever you want.
Well, you're the student, so you can aura.
That's aura to not raise your
I
hand.
didn't know.
Make sure. Okay.
Very good, very good. So, aura, that's something that's popular with the New Age movement. And as we know, there's all sorts of different New Age modalities and different kind of things that they're interested as far as that goes. I wanted to introduce this topic with sort of a parable or a metaphor. If you guys know anything about my home state, do you guys know the largest mountain in the state of Maine? Anyone familiar with that? There's no prize for this one. Katahdin, yes. So in 1939, a young boy named Don Fendler spent 9 lonely days lost on a mountain in Maine, and they just made a film about this. In the dark recesses of Baxter State Park, this is actually a photo that I took myself. That's Mount Katahdin out in the back, and that's all the wilderness surrounding it. It's Maine's largest wilderness. A 12-year-old found himself separated from his hiking companions, and he was left to find his own way home. Over the next week and a half, with a dogged perseverance, this boy traveled over 50 miles on his own, eating little more than wild berries along the way. He eventually, because he listened to the advice of his father, he followed a stream of water, and after all this time, he eventually finds a small cabin that's owned by this family. And when he gets to this cabin, he is absolutely famished, and he's down to 58 pounds of body weight. And this family that takes him in called the doctor, and he told them, give him a soup, and don't let him get all the soup he wants. Don't even let him hold the spoon, because he is just going to be ravenous and want to eat too much. And we know what happens if you're starving and you eat too much. It could kill you. It could kill you. So, in much the same way that Don Fendler was physically starved, we're dealing with people in the New Age movement that are spiritually starved. They've come out of a post-Enlightenment society where materialism reigns supreme, where people are just viewed as cogs in the machine. They're viewed as stardust, and their only value is economic output. So the New Age movement is a response to this materialistic movement that has, particularly in the middle of the 20th century, in the East we see it in the Soviet system, in the West, in just like the heartless versions of consumerism and capitalism. The New Age is a response to this spiritual starvation. And as Christians, we need to be ready to meet the spiritual hunger in an appropriate way. Because right now, people involved in New Age spirituality, they're ready to gobble up everything in front of them. So what are New Age people interested in? Well, whether it's transcendental meditation, tarot card readings, astral projection, crystal healing, raising your vibrational awareness, psychedelic trips, or a Kundalini awakening, spiritual seekers are ready to consume. Now, of all groups of people, New Agers are some of the most open to spiritual realities and experiences. And it is for this reason that a Scottish theologian named John Drain, he says the New Age movement is both the greatest threat to the church, and it's also the greatest opportunity for the church. Now, why is the New Age movement such a threat? Well, one of the reasons is you can, as opposed to, like an atheist or someone from Islam, where they just like, I disagree that Jesus is the way to God. A New Ager may hear the gospel message and go, oh, that's great for you. I'm glad that works for you. That's valid. Merrill was using that phrase a lot. That's valid. That's valid. But they can affirm that Jesus is this great guy, and maybe he's this ascended master. But to say that he's the one true God is something that it just doesn't register with them. So they can be nice and receive the gospel without really receiving it, if that makes sense. So it makes it a great threat, because Jesus just becomes pared down, sort of like Merla was talking about how the translation of God as kami can kind of bring the one true God down to the level of the other gods. But it's also the greatest opportunity, because previous, when atheism had its high watermark, atheists are very close to the supernatural and spiritual experiences. But the New Agers, they're ready to talk about spiritual experiences. They're ready to talk about how you've encountered God in your life. So these people are ready to engage. Whether it's people at UFO conferences or people that are into like we said, reading auras and things like that. They're ready to talk about their experiences. Now, if we're going to engage the New Age, we need to define it first. What you will find is that not a lot of people will actually say, "Oh, I'm a New Ager. I go to the New Age church, the First New Age Church of Moncton, or whatever." They don't use that phrase. Honestly, New Age, while it was used by people in this movement, especially in like the '60s and stuff, it's kind of become a pejorative now. It's like calling a Christian a fundamentalist. You don't always want to use that phrase to people that are influenced by this movement. The new spirituality is probably more appropriate, and it's really a spectrum of beliefs. But just because there's such a broad spectrum that we're dealing with, I'm going to use the term New Age and New Agers just as a term of convenience for us today. But keep that in mind when you're dealing with people that are involved with this new spirituality. So the New Age is a spectrum of beliefs and practices. It's hard to pin them down to a specific group. One person may be involved with energy healing, but they're not interested in psychedelic journeys. Another may specialize in divination with their tarot cards, but they're not into horoscopes or higher vibrations. They might even think that's superstitious. So there's no uniformity in the New Age movement. It's pick and choose. And the only common creed in the New Age movement is that there is no creed. So the difficulty in pinning down what defines the New Age has to do with the individualistic and the consumeristic ethos. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to enlightenment and happiness, which is administered by an official institution. Instead of being that top-down sort of model, it's a do-it-yourself spirituality. New Agers are expected to find out what works for them personally. So, spiritual consumerism. Carl Trueman, the cultural commentator, has written about the plausibility of self-creation in today's Western culture. And he's speaking more generally. And by this, he means that consumerism has enabled the message that, quote, you have the power to transform yourself by the mere swipe of a credit card. This ethos extends to the New Age movement, where many find themselves in a spiritual marketplace. It's no longer the days where you lived in a town and there was the one church in the town and everybody went to that church and we all believed the same thing. It's now, you have a lot of options out there. So people are evaluating the different spiritual paths and what I call psychotechnologies, different techniques for unlocking spirituality, spiritual practices. And spirituality, instead of being defined as something that's above and outside of you, it's more like a commodity in the New Age movement. At least that's the way that it is treated a lot of the time. So spiritual consumerism puts the power in the hands of the individual, and it fuels animosity toward institutional religion. This is where the church can sometimes be looked down upon. Can you still hear me on that? Yeah. Good. So the movement of the New Age is anti-institutional by its very nature, and this is part of its postmodern ethos and its rejection of modernism. It's distrustful of any organization that has the top-down approach to life, and as I said, Christianity itself, for from their point of view, it's inextricably associated with institutionalization. And by that, they think of like oppressive hierarchies of institutional power. And instead of seeing the church as providing the path to spiritual wholeness, they see it as responsible for centuries of squelching the free expression of our human nature and our spiritual nature. So sometimes these attitudes are fueled more by prejudice than actual history, but this is the sort of perception New Agers can have of the church. As part of the postmodern aspect of the New Age, they're also skeptical of claims to absolute truth. So this is true for spiritual things as well as for secular matters. And as I said, to say that Jesus is a way to God is often okay with them. If you say that you're a Christian and you follow Jesus, they're going to be fine with that. But if you say that Jesus is the way to God and he is God incarnate, this is a hard saying for them. The next thing we want to talk about is syncretism. So Merla talked about this in the context of Japan, where they sometimes meld different systems. For them, they meld Shintoism and Buddhism, and she even talked about how some Catholic movements will combine Catholicism with Shintoism. Well, syncretism is the name of the game in the New Age. And really, there's nothing no one part of the New Age is really new. It's more of an amalgamation of different spiritualities that have all been brought together. This amalgamation comes from esoteric traditions. You think of Madame Blavatsky and Theosophy, Eastern religious ideas, especially Hinduism and Buddhism. And then you have, on top of those systems, you have Western individualism that gives you that consumeristic mindset. So John Drain, that I mentioned earlier, he says the New Age movement is like a vacuum cleaner because it just sucks up everything around it and it creates this whole new blob that's different from what it was before. And if you guys have ever studied early Christianity, you remember who the Gnostics were? The Gnostics? I'm seeing a few heads nod. Well, someone has compared the Gnostic groups to silly putty. What do we know about silly putty? It just goes on everything and it just picks up whatever's around it and it just brings it all out of its original setting. So melding of divergent belief systems is called syncretism. So this is why you might even find a lot of people that are involved in New Age practices, but they call themselves a Christian. They're using Christian jargon to do New Age things. Now this presents some problems for us as Christians. We're trying to get the message of the gospel, the message of grace for salvation rather than works for salvation to people in the New Age movement. So loose definitions are a problem. Postmodern relativism and syncretism. These are unique challenges to us. Needless to say, this is very different than engaging with the atheists who stress logical and evidential arguments. Because the atheists are at least looking for ultimate truth. This is, if anyone knows who this is Antony Flew. He was recognized as the most notorious atheist of the 20th century. And he always prided himself for following the evidence wherever it leads. And for many, many years, he was one of the top philosophical atheists that would have these debates and write these books. And very late in life, in the last 10, 15 years of his life, he finally became not a Christian, but he became a deist because he was so convinced for the evidence for, he didn't think life could come about on its own, and he saw the evidence for the fine-tuning of the universe, and he was convinced that there was a God. So he changed his atheism late in life because of logical, rational reasons, because that's what's important for an atheist of that sort of thing. If you've ever heard of Lee Strobel, he's a very popular apologist, but he started out as a hard-nosed atheist, legal editor of the Chicago Tribune. When he looked into the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, he was so compelled by the historical evidence that he became a Christian. So these are all very left-brain ideas, logical, rational values. Are you guys familiar with, sometimes this is overblown, but there's some truth to it, where the left brain, the left hemisphere, is focused on the logical and the rational, whereas the right brain, the right hemisphere, is focused on the intuitive and the personal and the experiential. Well, the atheists, or just people that are more of the modernist mindset, they're more left brain oriented. With the New Age, it's a whole different ballgame. They are way more interested in personal, experiential, and intuitive questions. So it's not to say that they don't value truth at all, but they're more interested in the experiential part of it. So if we're dealing with a different mindset, we have to approach them differently than we've approached sort of the left-brain people. So the question for New Agers is not, the logical, like, premise one, premise two, God exists, that sort of thing. They're asking, what spiritual path is going to bring the most personal meaning and fulfillment in my life? Christianity may be true, but how does that benefit me right here and right now? So, how do we approach this sort of mindset? First, let's find out what kind of questions are New Agers asking. This comes from Ross Clifford and Philip Johnson's book, which I have a copy down there. You guys can take a look at after. There's these Australian Christians that have worked evangelizing the New Age for many years, and they came up with these questions and a few others that are really crucial for people in the New Age movement. One is, how can I become the best version of myself? What is my place in the cosmos? How can I reconnect with the divine? And what spiritual path is right for me? What you'll notice right up front is these are all very existential questions. They're less to do with ultimate truths and more to do with personal realities. In school, we were told there are no stupid questions, which is not really true. But in this sense, it's true in the sense of both the left brain questions and the right brain questions, they both represent real human concerns. And the New Age really emphasizes these sort of personal existential questions. So when we approach them, we want to keep these in mind for what they're looking for in spiritual fulfillment. So I'm going to suggest a Christian response to this New Age mindset. And I'm going to put three different avenues of engaging the New Age. And there are others, but these are ones that I think are very promising. Number one is meaning, addressing meaning and wholeness and addressing that question of what is my place in the cosmos. Power, New Agers are interested in spiritual power, and we want to demonstrate the power of the Holy Spirit. And holiness. New Agers are very interested in spiritual masters, people that have been awakened. And although we might not use the same terminology, one of the goals in Christian life is our sanctification, our becoming like Christ. So I want to home in on these aspects of the questions that New Agers are asking. So let's talk about meaning for a second. Meaning. New Ager asks, what is my place in the cosmos? As they ask this question, they may be drawn to certain movements. They may be going to neo-pagan groups. They may be going to psychic fairs. They may go to the spiritualist church, or they may get involved with the human potential movement, among many other options. In all cases, this person is looking not just for a magical power, but they're looking for a community that's built around certain ideas that scratch the itch for personal fulfillment and meaning. So for some people, this could be a return to nature worship and neo-paganism, where the constructs of Western society are cast aside as evils that have marred the creation. So you'll see women go into the Gaia movement and goddess worship. Men might go into the Norse worship of Odin and Thor. And surprisingly, this is actually a really big growing movement, especially in prison populations. There's a whole revival of this sort of thing. So you have neo-paganism on one end, and you also have more pantheistic and Eastern New Age ideas on the other end. People that are into a pantheistic worldview, as they try to look at meaning in their life, they may see themselves as a manifestation of the eternal God force, or they are on a quest to discover their inner divinity. This form of worldview, the pantheism, it often goes with Eastern meditation practices, and there's like this eternal quest to keep going inward and to dissolve the ego until you're basically one with the divine. So you get to thinking, these two forms of the New Age movement, whether it's neo-paganism on one end or pantheism on the other, I think both of them, they give you more meaning than you get out of the materialistic, we're all just stardust kind of thing. So we have to appreciate, why are these movements so powerful? Why are they so compelling to people? Well, it's because it gives them a purpose in life. If you can see yourself as like a manifestation of the divine, that's a whole lot better than like you're just a bunch of particles colliding together. Or if you can like be a part of restoring creation from all of the ravaging that's been done by those filthy capitalists. You can have a purpose and meaning in your life. So these are some of the reasons why these movements have a lot of power. It's not just the spiritual powers and stuff like that. There's meaning behind it. So as Christians, if we approach people like this with just like a drab, abstract doctrines, we'll give you our tract with 4 spiritual laws, it's not going to hit people in the same way that it might have hit a previous generation. People are looking for a bigger story than that. The good thing is there has recently been a big recognition of the importance of incorporating meaning and story in the Christian world. And at this point, it almost seems cliche to talk about Tolkien because he's so popular these days. But he really did do a good job of communicating Christian truths, eternal truths through his literature. Peter Kraft, who wrote a whole book about Tolkien's philosophy, he says, literature incarnates philosophy. Literature incarnates philosophy. It shows the underlying themes. This is a lady named Holly Ordway, and she specializes in what she calls literary apologetics. And what she means by this is literary apologetics is the presentation of the truth of the Christian faith in and through literature. So instead of giving your systematic theology, God created the world and then he created man and man fell into sin, like you use literature to bear out those themes and it takes on a whole new life. This literature helps show the truth, not just tell the truth. It shows the truth about the world both in its ugliness and sin as well as in its beauty. Now I want to give an example of this sort of thing. So there's this moment in The Return of the King where Sam Gamgee is stuck in Mordor and he's all beaten and he's defeated and he has this epiphany about the problem of evil. Now we think of the problem of evil. People, why does a good God allow bad things? Well, just read this paragraph that Sam Gamgee has in the book. Far above the Efelduath in the west, the night sky was still dim and pale. There, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a bright star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end, the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. His song in the tower had been defiance rather than hope, for then he was thinking of himself. Now, for a moment, his own fate and even his master's ceased to trouble him. He crawled back into the brambles and laid himself by Frodo's side, and putting away all fear, he cast himself into a deep, untroubled sleep. Now, compare this epiphany about the problem of evil, where you just see evil, you just know that one day evil is all going to be swallowed up by the greater good. Now, how do we often address the problem of evil in our context? This is the apologist statement. For any unjust suffering in the present life, God will more than make up for it in the next life. It doesn't connect the same way, because you can give someone, I'm not saying this is untrue. I think it is true. But you're not incarnating that Christian belief in the ultimate goodness of the world and God's, just the amazing nature of how God is going to wrap all things up. So Sam Gamgee's vision is an incarnated form of the Scripture's promise that one day, as it says in the book of Revelation, night will be no more. And as it says in 1 Corinthians, there will be a day when death is swallowed up in victory. To quote Peter Kraft again, philosophy says truth, but literature shows truth. We're not all writers, we're not all poets, we're not literary scholars, but we can saturate our lives in good literature, and this should bear out and just spill over in our lives. And we can promote good literature, promote classic works, whether it's Dostoevsky or Tolkien or Dorothy Sayers, whatever it is, promote good literature. And this is often kind of like a backdoor to get into non-Christians' lives. It is just literature that just oozes the glory of God right off of it. But beyond literature, we all have our own stories to tell. Our own stories of meaning that we can incorporate into our lives. So Dale Allison, he's an elite New Testament scholar. And now that he's getting older, he's starting to share all these experiences with God that he's had, that he was a little bit more coy earlier in his professional career. But it's really powerful how he just shows these moments with God that have just utterly transformed his life. And I think these are also powerful for reaching someone of a New Age mindset. So this is another story where there's sort of an epiphany about the problem of evil that just takes your breath away. So I'm going to read this one. It's a little bit longer. Dale says, and this is just a story of something that happened to him some years back. He says, I was still in bed Sunday morning when my wife turned on some classical music. It didn't wake me, but rather brought me to that fascinating state between waking and sleeping. I entered some sort of place that was entirely sky blue, composed of softly pulsating diamond crystals, with large bird showers or souls flitting through it. It was like being in the sea. This stuff surrounded me, but I wasn't exactly floating. The place itself was joy unbounded, ecstasy without compare. The music was part of it, and the bird shapes were overflowing with, singing with, happiness, as was the place itself. Along with the joy was profound peace. The only thing comparable in my experience being one night in the hospital when I floated around in a morphine stupor. I experienced all this for 3, 4, or 5 seconds, and then was so overwhelmed that I began to cry. My crying then brought me out of that state. Words can't begin to describe what this was like. It will stay with me for the rest of my life. It confirms me in my belief that underneath all this mess is absolute joy. I perked up when the sermon 3 hours later told me that creation was the overflowing of love from the members of the Trinity. This made perfect sense. It also confirms in me my eschatological solution, an experiential solution, not an intellectual solution to be sure, to the problem of evil. As I lay in bed, I thought that if all the world in its miseries were suddenly dumped into that sky blue land, the joy would be so overwhelming and complete that all evils and regret and anger and hatred and revenge would dissipate in a second. It is so immense that it would make everything else matter less than a hill of beans. I think someone in that state would really feel that the sufferings of the present time are not worthy to be compared. Now that sort of thing, it's subjective. It's not something that we can verify that he had, this experience with God, but he has this epiphany. He has this experience with God that maybe intellectually he's never figured out the problem of evil. But this moment where he believed God spoke to him in this coming out of the sleeping state, it just made him realize that God's goodness is so big that everything that we see as evil will just be nothing compared to the greatness of the goodness of God. And this is the sort of thing that can speak to people's need for meaning. Now, let's compare this to another statement from the apologists to deal with the same problem of evil. God has perfect knowledge of all possible universes and has chosen to create the universe which allows for the most possible good and the least possible evil without violating free will. Yeah, that might be true. I'm not necessarily against this, called Molinism, if you're interested. That doesn't connect with me on a heart level, that God is just like this machine that has done all these algorithms to figure out the most pleasurable universe while maintaining free will. There's something that hits the heart about the experiential moment with God in a way that the apologists' traditional statements just don't hit. So, Christian, read and share literature that incarnates the truth of the Christian faith. Share your own stories. Write about your own encounters with God and your own transformational episodes with God. If any of you guys are going to be going into preaching, we love expositional, line-by-line teaching. But remember, Jesus told a lot of stories. So tell stories. Share meaning with a postmodern world that's hungry for meaning. The next avenue of reaching people of a New Age mindset is the avenue of power. So as I said, people are really interested. How can I become the best version of myself? The New Age has a quest for self-improvement. This is a holistic quest, so it's physical, mental, and spiritual. And the spiritual aspect of that, it leads to New Age practices like manifesting, astral projection, invoking altered states of consciousness through meditation or psychedelics. It may attract people to things like Reiki or therapeutic touch, energy healing. And I'm not here to deny that sometimes people have had physical and mental improvements from these practices, but I do bring them up to point out that the interest that the New Agers have in power. They want power and control over the body, mind, and spirit. So Christians should meet this concern for power with the power of God. In the early days of the church, Christians found themselves in the middle of the Mediterranean world in the Roman Empire. And in that day, there was a lot of people that practiced magic. There were polytheists. There was priests of mystery religions. That the mission field of the early Christians looked a lot less like Hume and Voltaire and a lot more like Aleister Crowley and Madame Blavatsky. It was a world soaked in the supernatural. Rod Dreher, citing from the work of historian Robert Knapp, points out that one of the main reasons that the early church succeeded in getting so many converts in the Greco-Roman world is that the magic of the Christians was more powerful than the magic of the pagan priests and sorcerers. I use that term advisedly. So sources among the early church fathers, if you ever read some of those early people like Justin Martyr and Tertullian, they attest that a huge reason that people came into the church was the Christians had this unique power of healings, exorcisms, and prophetic gifts. And miracles were sort of the brand of the early Christians. So similarly today, New Agers are very well aware of the supernatural realm. I'm going to bring up John Drain again, the Scottish theologian. This is what he has to say, and he said this 20 years ago. I think it's even more true today. The scientific materialist philosophy that has dominated for the past 200 or 300 years is finished. It still staggers on in some conservative institutions, but that has no real future. To the extent that Christianity has aligned itself with that view, it too has no future. All the signs are that the emerging worldview will be a renewed supernaturalism. So I would contend that as people are becoming more and more aware of the supernatural, Christians should meet this head on and not be afraid. Now, this doesn't mean that everyone here has to become a Pentecostal. There are some problems with excesses in the Pentecostal charismatic movement. I think we can all know that. But setting that aside for what it is, we should exercise faith in the power of the Holy Spirit to confirm the message of the gospel as we preach the message of the gospel. This is a really high quality picture that I grabbed. This is John Wimber, and he was very prominent in the 1980s and the first half of the 1990s for his death. And he came from a complete pagan background. He was the band manager for the Righteous Brothers, and he almost went on tour with the Beatles. He ended up getting saved in a Quaker church. And at this Quaker church, they did not really believe God did miracles anymore. But he eventually, as he studied the early church and as he studied his Bible, he found that the Holy Spirit is very much alive and well these days. So he ended up just being this contact point for people of all churches, whether they're Presbyterians or Methodists or Anglicans or Baptists. I happen to go to the denomination that he helped to start, the Vineyard. And he just really jump-started people's expectation for the Holy Spirit to work in power in today's day and age. Now, what I like to call the aeropagus of the New Age movement are psychic fairs, because they don't really, there's no church of the New Age, but these are the sort of places that people like to go. They're always looking for what's the newest psychotechnology, what's the newest, spiritual gizmo that I can get a hold of. They go to psychic fairs. And those people that, Philip Johnson and Ross Clifford that I mentioned earlier, these are Australian evangelical Christians. And what they do is they started by going to psychic fairs and passing out tracts. You guys all need to repent, you're going to hell. And then they changed tacks a little bit because they were not getting any response. They started renting out booths at psychic fairs, and they're like, hey, we'll lay hands on you and pray for healing in the name of Jesus. And they started getting a lot of people interested in Jesus through this laying on of hands. And of course, they're not seeing, everybody's healed every time. But the fact that they're willing to step out in faith and let the Holy Spirit confirm the message of the gospel opened a lot of doors for them. So this is one creative aspect where you can show the power of the Holy Spirit to people that are interested in power. So I would say, Christian, take a step of faith, become open to God working through you in a supernatural way. Be expectant that God will speak through you, that he will heal through your prayers, consider going to a psychic fair. Be all prayed up and then pray on your way out. When the New Ager sees that faith and the power that's behind that faith, you will have caught their attention. When they see the power of the Holy Spirit, they'll know that it is through him that they can become the best version of themselves. And that's not just so they can wield this power. Spiritual power is always a byproduct of faith. It's not the main goal. But they'll know that because when they see that power, they'll know they're interacting with the one true creator God instead of all the derivatives and the counterfeits. So the third aspect of engaging the New Age is through cultivating holiness. Now, New Agers are very interested in people that exude holiness. Remember the question they asked? How can I reconnect with the divine? New Agers are looking for spiritual masters and gurus. They don't just want someone that has intellectual knowledge. It's great if you got your PhD in theology and this and that, but you as a person, how have you connected with God? This is what they want to know. They want someone that is reconnected with the divine themselves. In Indian religion, this is the master who has opened up their chakras, and they've harnessed the power of prana, the universal life force. In a way, this is its own form of holiness that's attractive to spiritual seekers. They want to see people that have advanced spiritually. So this is something that's really gaining steam. This guy's preparing for his ayahuasca journey with this Latin American shaman. This is becoming a new pastime for affluent Western individuals. They go down to South America or Central America, and then they interact with a shaman that has all this spiritual accolades around him, or all this spiritual reputation, and they're taking hallucinogenic substances because they want to have their own experience with the divine. They see people like this shaman as having something that they don't, and also having something that Western materialism has not offered them, reconnecting with the divine. This is a picture of Swami Yogananda. He's a very famous figure. He really popularized yoga and meditation in the West. Steve Jobs would read his autobiography once a year because he was just so inspired by this Hindu holy man. So they're looking for figures like this, not just someone that has like a bunch of book knowledge. They're looking for people that, or at least on the surface, as it looks like, oh, we know this person has been transformed. I want to know what they have. So Christians, what do we have to offer as far as holiness? What do we have to offer as far as lives of people that have connected with God? So in our tradition, we have saints. Saints are people that they've connected with the divine, and we give them these special titles. And of course, the saints in our tradition, we know them for their miracles. St. Anthony would cast out devils. St. Francis, what was his coolest miracle? There's a lot. No, not that one. No, he could like talk to animals. At least that's what they said. St. Teresa would levitate. But the thing is with the saints, not all of them, did miracles. The saints were primarily known for their holiness and their devotion to God, and that they were transformed. The miracles are always just something on the side, a byproduct, and often the saints in the Christian church would be embarrassed of their miracles, and they would seek to hide them. So, the saints of the church, or Christians that have connected with God, one of the tools that the church has provided are what are called the spiritual disciplines. This is something that, especially in evangelical culture, has been neglected at times. The spiritual disciplines they're self-denying practices that allow God's light to shine through us. So they consist of things like fasting, prayer vigils, solitude, almsgiving. Jesus practiced all of these. There's no hard and fast rules, you have to do it on this day and that day. But there's something that Jesus did, John the Baptist did, many of the Old Testament saints did these things. They're not a works righteousness system. They're a way for just fighting the remaining fleshly nature in our lives so that God can shine through. The spiritual disciplines are the Christian answer to the New Age spiritual techniques and the psychotechnologies. There's something that modern day Christians need to recover. And by cultivating holiness in our own lives, we can show that the power of God is not just abstract, it's not just head knowledge, but that it is deeply transformational. New Agers are seeking God consciousness, nirvana, or ego transcendence. But Christians can offer a true peace, which is freedom from the grips of sin, and guilt, and works righteousness, and a freedom to experience the grace of God. To just give a concrete example, I'll bring up the example. This is a guy named Konstantin Oprezin. In the Soviet era, this was a Christian that was imprisoned for his faith in an underground jail in Romania. And his example of holiness while in that prison radically transformed his fellow inmates, and probably the people running the prison as well. There's a fellow prisoner that, I won't pronounce his name because I don't know how to pronounce it, but he said that he saw the light of God while he was with this man. And he was the caretaker for Constantine because he had just terrible tuberculosis, and he was completely frail at that time in his life. And this is what he says. When I took care of Constantine in the cell, I was very happy because I felt his spirituality penetrating my soul. Well, I have this slide right here. I learned from him to be good, to forgive, not to curse your torturer, not to consider anything of this world to be a treasure for you. In fact, he was living on another level. Only his body was with us, and his love. Can you imagine? We were in a cell without windows, without air, humid, filthy, yet we had moments of happiness that we never reached in freedom. I cannot explain it. Rod Dreher, who comments on this story, writes that because Constantine had already died to himself, he was able to become a window into eternity through which the divine light passed to illuminate the other men in that dark, filthy cell. This story, of course, is not directly in the context of New Age spirituality, but the power of a holy life is not limited to any one demographic. When someone truly carries the light of Christ, it is a contagious thing. It's a compelling thing, because New Agers place such a high value on the right brain values of the personal and experiential. They're going to be captured by a life of true holiness. Richard Wurmbrand, who founded Voice of the Martyrs, he once said that there are two kinds of Christians: those who sincerely believe in God, and those that just as sincerely believe that they believe in God. If you try to approach someone that's spiritually hungry, that's in the New Age movement, and they're attracted to all like these gurus and ascended masters, and you come to them with a life that's just in spiritual shambles, and you have no peace with God, and you have no life of prayer, it's not going to be compelling to them, even if you've memorized, all your favorite apologists' arguments and you're studied up on New Testament history. It's very difficult, but to reach this sort of people, you yourself need to be transformed by the grace of God. Many of us know what it's like to be in the presence of someone who sincerely believes, and someone that carries the light of Christ. You ever been around someone and it almost felt like tangible, like the glory of God was on them? It just seemed to rub right off of them. So Christian, cultivate holiness in your life. This will involve spiritual disciplines, fasting, prayer, radical forgiveness, sacrificial generosity. The disciplines are not an end in themselves. Like I said, they're not works righteousness, but they are tools to help us fight and defeat our sinful nature and to allow the light of Christ to shine through us. Unlike the New Age movement, we don't look inward for our peace. We don't look to constantly go see the power within. We look outward. We look to the God of grace. Christ, in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, "You are the light of the world." So may we live up to those words. May we become icons into heaven through our own personal transformation. And as we reconnect with the divine ourselves, the spiritually hungry will see a path for themselves to do the same. So in my estimation, out of those three different avenues of approaching New Age, this is by far the most costly and the most difficult. I love reflecting on literature that shows the glory of God. I love to pray and expect God to do miracles, but fighting the flesh, practicing the spiritual disciplines, this is difficult. It goes against the grain of my being and all of us. But I think out of the three, it's the most important. If you're sharing Christ with someone, they want to see that this Christ has actually impacted you, has actually transformed you. So as we start wrapping up, just talking about meeting spiritual needs. The New Age movement, as we said, is the greatest threat and the greatest opportunity facing the church. The world is spiritually hungry, and it has gone in any and all directions, seeking to quench that hunger. We as Christians, we can be ready to meet that hunger through those three things of meaning, power, and holiness. For a lot of us that are really interested in pursuing this group of people, it's going to require us to come out of program-based spirituality that we might have been raised with. In the old days, you had like a program where you'd knock on doors, or you'd invite people to an alpha course, or you'd invite people to this special revival tent meeting. It may be a little different these days than the old systems, because we're dealing with a different mindset. For those of us that are more left-brain Christians, try to cultivate that intuitive side of your faith, the experiential side, and the holistic. Not to say that you should base your faith all on experience. That would be lopsided in its own way. But don't neglect the experiential aspect of how God works in your life. We need to, if we're going to address people that are interested in the heart and the imagination and the intuitive, then we need to approach them in that way. I'm going to recommend a few books that are about the New Age. This one is by John Drain. It's called What is the New Age Still Saying to the Church? This is because it's the second edition of his original book. He does a really good job of explaining the mindset that they come from, and you feel like you get to know what they're really thinking, and it's not just this thing where he's just constantly lambasting them. It really humanizes them, and so you understand where they're coming from. Very similar is Jesus and the Gods of the New Age by Ross Clifford and Philip Johnson. These are the guys that go to the psychic fairs, and they just give this huge overview of what New Agers are interested in. They're interested in myths. They're interested in the occult. They're interested in auras and this and that. And they just do a really good job of giving case studies of people in the New Age and where they've come from, many of whom have converted to Christianity, and they explain what were the things that got them to convert. And then a third one, let's see if I can click that. This is a newer book, and it's by Justin Brierley. If you guys have ever heard of the Unbelievable radio program from England, he would host that for many years. This just kind of chronicles the whole shift in the attitude toward the supernatural, where if you remember in like the mid-2000s, when Dawkins and Hitchens and everyone was really popular, that whole movement has kind of declined, and people are way more interested in spirituality, both in a Christian sense, but also in a New Age sense. And so this is a really good, it's an apologetic book, but it's also a historical overview of that movement. And then as far as books that I think do a good job of just offering a Christian right-brained approach to these sort of things, this is the book where Dale Allison shares his mystical experience as he's waking up. It's called Encountering Mystery, Religious Experience in a Secular Age. And he just talks about, angel stories and, negative spiritual experiences, and how they're actually very much widespread in ways that we hadn't realized before. And he approaches it as a Christian. And then finally, this is a brand new book from last fall by Rod Dreher, Living in Wonder. And his whole goal is to have Christians live in an enchanted world again. Live in a world where you expect angels to be involved in what's going on in the background. You're expecting God to be behind everything that's going on. You look at a rock and you think, how does this rock, reflect the glory of God? It's a very much right-brained, intuitive aspect to faith, and I just found it an amazing book. He talks about prayer and miracles and things like that. And I brought a copy of each of those books so you guys can just take a look at those on your way out. So I think we still have some time for Q&A. If you guys had any questions about the New Age or anything even slightly related. Yeah?
Who was the woman who did literary apologetics?
That's Holly Ordway. She's a Tolkien scholar, and she recently wrote a spiritual autobiography or a spiritual biography of Tolkien, and she's just got great material.
I'm wondering, what would you say about the significance of belonging in terms of, or the power of loving community in ministry to seekers from the New Age kind of made reference to it, but I just wondered.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the reasons, so you have some people that are just lone wolf New Age, but other ones, they'll get involved in the Wicca movement, and they have their own coven and their own group, or the neo-paganism movement has, they're more like rigid in their path of spirituality. And those particular aspects of the New Age have a close-knit community that really reinforces belief. And many of them, they look to the church and they feel like either they don't fit in or the church doesn't really prioritize that close-knit community. I know Meryl and I have talked about being in some church environments where it's like everyone's like a family, and other ones where it's like going to the golf club once a week. And if you have the latter sort of church, New Agers are not going to feel that close-knit community that reinforces the spirituality. So that's something that, depending on your context, has been neglected by a lot of Christians. Anyone want to read my aura? Joke? Joke. All right, well, any other questions? Last chance? All right, well, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. At 3:30, Solid Grounds will be open. There are free drinks for everyone, under the condition that you talk to somebody who is there. Okay? So you cannot grab a drink and just leave. You need to talk to a human that is a guest here. And then tonight's